Hi everybody, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Hope you all had a good Labor Day. Welcome to tonight's Joe Cioffi Weather Show. Doing three things at the same time. Working off another computer, working on this computer, sending out a flash flood warning for parts of Central Ocean County in New Jersey. Had a tornado near my house today. So with all that's going on with Hurricane Dorian, which you can see right over there, on the satellite loop. It's just kept us made for a very, very busy Labor Day. Hurricane Dorian just continues to just marvel. And not just from the fact that it had strengthened to, it tied for the second strongest storm ever in this part of the Atlantic, and the winds, 185 miles an hour, second only to Hurricane Allen in 1980, that was in the Gulf of Mexico and they carried 190 mile an hour winds on the advisory. But now the way it has, and this was well modeled when you think about it, as we were talking about over the last several days. The models have been actually very good on this idea of stalling. They were perhaps not initially going in the longer term, showing a lot of this stalling going out over the state of Florida, and instead it's happened about 100 or so miles, or a little bit more than that, further to the east, and it's been sitting over Grand Bahama Island. And think about this, folks. Grand Bahama Island has been experiencing hurricane force winds now for 24 hours, and probably in some places winds in excess of 100 miles an hour for 24 hours. And they still have another 24 hours of this, because this isn't going anywhere until later tomorrow, the way things look. It's just been amazing how this storm has performed. Even from the get-go, when it formed in the Virgin Islands, that the core of that storm was already in place, and how it intensified very, very rapidly. That was probably a very good sign. It was certainly a shot across the bow from the storm itself, basically saying, you see this? You ain't seen nothing yet, because we saw gusts up to 100 or 100 miles an hour in parts of the Virgin Islands as this went from a tropical storm to just reaching minimal hurricane strength, and then that rapid deepening that occurred over the weekend. Joe Rayo will be joining me shortly. He just had a few extra things to do, so I think we'll start. I'm going to bring up Dorian on the full screen, because there are a couple of things going on at the moment. We've had an obvious weakening today, and we went from about 910 millibars at the bottom, and then overnight we were at 915 millibars. Well, we have now seen it fill up to about 940 millibars, and also, as we went through the day, we saw the eye filled with clouds, and now we're seeing that eye trying to come back. We're actually seeing an Eyewall replacement cycle that is underway, and that is probably part of the reason why we've seen the pressure actually rise, because as the eye deteriorates and a new eye forms, it does cause the storm to fluctuate in intensity. We also have some interaction with the Bahamas themselves, although the Bahamas are not mountainous islands by any stretch of the imagination. I believe the highest elevation on the Bahamas is about 35 feet. So we're not talking about mountains here, and they're not islands like Puerto Rico, or even some of the Leeward and Windward Islands, where you have some of these mountains that go up several thousand feet or more and can disrupt the circulation of a storm. Bahamas are pretty flat. So the island interaction is probably maybe one of the smaller factors here. But the fact that it's not moving, it's been upwelling this water, the ocean water, this deep layer, warm ocean water here that was fuel to get it down to as low a pressure as it got. Well, now it's finally working some of the colder water at the bottom back up to the top. You're getting some mixing, so the water temperatures are definitely not what they were. It's hard for me to imagine that this will get back to its peak strength. We may see, after the Eyewall replacement cycle is done, We might see it get a little stronger from this point. Maybe it even gets up to briefly to a Category 5 again, but it would be very brief because later tomorrow, as it starts moving northward, we're going to start to see the impacts of shortwave troughs that are going to cause the wind field to begin to expand, and ocean water temperatures that are warm, but they're not quite as supercharged warm as they are in this particular area. Also, you see the bands here coming into the Florida coast. That continues, and we're seeing on the local radars there some squalls that have been coming in. I think I hear the door, and Mr. Rayo is about to make an entrance. And indeed, he is making an entrance. Welcome. Yes. You're needed. You're wanted. Come here. Sit. All right, so I'm going to bring up, Joe. I've got this. Let's see. Yes. Hang on a second. Patience now. So this is the I just went through the whole satellite, and it looked to me like one of those Eyewall replacement cycles was underway. And I don't know if you got to see it. I posted the link up last night to Levi Cowan's video from Tropical Tidbits.
I always look at that.
Oh, he was, he's just tremendous. He is terrific, and there are some. Every time I watch one of his videos, I learn something new, or I remember something that I may have learned and didn't learn it correctly. So, but and it looks like from the radar, as he described, and also on the satellite, that you're getting this eyewall replacement cycle happening. The thunderstorms, you don't have a complete ring where you see the yellow echoes. You don't have that complete ring closed all the way around. You have a comma at the bottom and a comma at the top. So you'd have to look at the recon data to kind of sort of verify this, but it looks like you've gotten a complete deterioration of the original eyewall, and that a new eyewall is beginning to form as those echoes eventually just circle all the way around and close off.
Right.
Very impressive. And the other thing is there's only one observation available at the moment, or there was, and it disappeared, and that was a spot called Settlement Point. And it was up a little while ago. They were 50 gusting to 76 on their observation, but we're getting no observations from Freeport, from West Grand Bahama, or East Grand Bahama, and it's been sitting there for 24 hours.
As you've been pointing out, they have been at or above hurricane force winds now for the last 24 hours, and it's quite likely that they're going to continue to see that for the next 24 hours. It's as if... I mean, when you're only moving at what, 1 or 2 miles an hour, it's crazy.
At least 4 high tide cycles, and 4 non-existent low tide cycles because the water ain't going out.
Right.
I did see some videos earlier of what appeared to be water that was above some 2-story structures, and you could see that it was up maybe about 3/4 of the way. You could see the treetops sticking out. And it seemed as if the whole ocean had come in this particular spot on Grand Bahama Island.
What horrible timing in regard to the astronomy of the situation. The moon, of course, at new phase, or just past new, what we call a syzygy, the alignment of the sun, the new moon, and the earth. And also, as all things would happen, this particular new moon is close to perigee, it is near the closest point in the moon's orbit. So it is not only just an astronomically high tide, but it's also a very high tide. The tidal range is at its greatest when the moon is at perigee and also at new or full phase. So this was just a horrible bit of timing. Not only do you have the superstorm like this, but also to have the moon close in and rearing its ugly head with its own tidal pulling of the ocean waters to aggravate the situation even more. I'm just
you could see the bands on the radar have actually been coming in, rotating back west-southwestward and around the system. So you're getting these squalls that are coming in from off the Atlantic into South Florida. Much of right now, just checking at a few of the observations there from Port St. Lucie, from Lake Woodruff, and down to West Palm Beach and further south in toward Hollywood, Florida. It's mostly about 15 to 20 miles an hour sustained, with gusts to maybe some gusts into the mid and high 20s. The core of the storm is still pretty far offshore. But going back to what you said, Joe, with the new moon and the tide issues, the tidal flooding is going to be extensive. Even if with the storm staying basically just offshore, it just creates this, I don't know, I guess the best way to describe it is like a canal where the land is the wall and all this water is being funneled around the top of the storm and then down. This is what happened with Hurricane Matthew, where the bays, the back bays up and down in northeast Florida, they had record tidal flooding with Matthew back in 2016, and we're probably going to see that again. Once this gets off Grand Bahama Island, it'll probably get exacerbated as the storm gets closer to the coast.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was listening this morning on CNN. They had on the phone, I think, the town supervisor of Port St. Lucie, Florida, which, by the way, is where the New York Mets play their exhibition games in the spring. They have a beautiful ballpark there. Back about 20 years ago, Port St. Lucie was not very much, as opposed to many of the larger and more well-known Florida cities and towns, but now it's fairly well built up. And you could hear in this gentleman's voice, I don't have his name, but he was on against CNN this morning, him talking about the fact that, well, a lot of the structures in Port St. Lucie were built for hurricanes, built for winds of, let's say, 100 to 115, 120 miles an hour. But then he was alluding to the fact that the maximum winds in Dorian were like 140, 150 at the time, and he was just very concerned about if the track took it more inland and over Port St. Lucie. He was saying, I just don't know how any of the homes in Port St. Lucie would be able to stand up to that. So he was definitely very concerned, as is everybody along the Florida coast.
Right, and it does appear, I mean, at this point, it does really look like it is going to stay just offshore, but come perilously close at times. Here's the Hurricane Center's forecast track. That's extremely tight there. Warnings actually are up from Jupiter Inlet and have been extended northward from Sebastian Inlet all the way up to the Georgia Florida state line, and now we have new hurricane watches up for the Georgia coast and much of the South Carolina coast. And I would imagine, given the track that you see here, the forecast track of the hurricane centers, and when we look at the various models, it kind of would make sense. I would think that you'll probably see an extension of those watches at some point, maybe tomorrow, later tomorrow, for the North Carolina coast, because it looks like it wants to straddle that whole coastline. And then we will address the question of what happens after that, because it is going to be passing by in what we call affectionately the box.
In the box, yes.
The box is a snowstorm term.
And normally we don't do it. Yeah, you're right. We normally don't take that into account until the cold winter months, or the benchmark, as it's sometimes called, 40 degrees north, 70 degrees west longitude. And there's the reconnaissance data which you just brought up.
And all those pressures, by the way, it looks like they're all 941s, but there were at least 3 passes through a center that didn't move. So basically you had the plane being able to usually the plane will fly up and out, and then the next point you'll see the change in the satellite picture where the eye has moved. Well, they're basically flying into the same place,
right,
which probably gives them, they're sending back good data. If there's an Eyewall replacement cycle underway, they're really seeing it, and the impact of the island that's having on this, and also just the fact that they're in that one spot and watching the radar echoes to see if they're wrapping around. So be interesting to see what they come up with. I don't see any wind barbs, by the way. From the colors, matching it off the legend at the bottom of the screen, it looks like there's a few between 113 and 137. I don't really see anything above that, so it certainly confirms that that Dorian is now less than a Category 5 hurricane, and the pressure certainly verifies that as well.
Yeah, I did one of our I did our Hudson Valley. No, I did the 5 o'clock Finals One News report today, and on one of my weather hits, I said, well, the storm has actually weakened. It's now down to a Category 4. And I paused for a second, and I said, we're talking about a monster hurricane when I'm talking about weakening down to a Category 4. It's just been incredible, Joe.
Right. I know I used quotation marks a few times when I wrote a couple pieces. Weakened, and maximum winds are just 150 miles an hour. Hurricane forecast models all plotted up on the same graphic here, and these are the latest. You can see they're all fairly consistent. Outliers they're not wild outliers. They're close together. The bulk of them are taking a track. They're all off the Florida coast, except for one. There's always got to be one.
Yeah.
But there's one. This one, for the longest time, up until through this morning, was still had it going left to almost the Gulf of Mexico, and then taking this sharp right turn and going east-northeast. So it's kind of calmed down a bit and gotten a bit more in line with the others. But they all pretty much say straddle up off the Georgia coast by a fair distance, closer to the South Carolina coast, probably over near or just over the Outer Banks, and then east-northeast or northeast to about 38 and 70. And then for our area, I would think that if you take the midpoint of all those tracks, I would think that might bring the northern edge of rain to the Delmarva Peninsula, coastal New Jersey for a short time, and maybe parts of central and eastern Long Island for a short time. A bit of a rougher time perhaps for southeastern New England, and very definitely Nova Scotia could be in line for something here.
And by that time, for Nova Scotia and also for Newfoundland, it's not going to be officially. It'll probably be a very strong extratropical storm. That probably by that time the system will have lost its tropical characteristics, but will still be a very potent storm with winds above hurricane force. And so they're going to have to watch very carefully as we progress toward the latter part of the weekend to the weekend in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and see how this all pans out for them.
All right, so why don't we just take a look, Joe? I have the upper air, because that is, the upper air is always the most important place that you want to look. And we watched this weekend. I'm just going to back it up a couple of frames. So we watched this weekend as that ridge built back into the southeast, and you also had that big upper high that's out in the west, and you can see Dorian over the Bahamas, the upper feature reflection. Then the ridge kind of pulls away. We had this little shortwave trough come through during Sunday night and today, and of course that produced a cold front and thunderstorms, flash flooding, and tornadoes in some places on Long Island. That we had a tornado right near my house. Then that lifts out, and now you've got that no man's land we talked about last week, except that it's set up further to the east, and Dorian is going to get into that weakness and start pushing northward, and then we get another system coming down from the northern jet that just picks it up, and this is on Friday, and just punts it out to the northeast, and you can see it lifts right up. And that big upper low that's dropping down near James Bay and toward Lake Huron, lifting that whole trough, and the axis there is northwest-southeast, what we call a negative tilt. I think this lends to the argument that this system could get re-energized in a post-tropical way, and you wind up with, as you described, probably a pretty strong storm getting up into Nova Scotia.
There's not, it's not going to be officially a tropical cyclone anymore, but it's going to be a lot closer to being maybe a winter-like, very strong nor'easter as it goes past Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And they've had their share. They are well aware that probably one of the most potent tropical systems that hit Nova Scotia was Hurricane Juan.
Yes.
A good number of years ago. And in the same season, they had Juan hit during the summer, and then they had a massive blizzard that hit a few months later, and they referred to the blizzard as White Juan.
Yes. I have faint recollection of that.
I think it was about 20, maybe one of our good viewers out there will know and post it and tell us.
Well,
exactly
Julianne Steele is watching. She might remember.
Yeah.
She's from that area.
Right.
And also, here's the GFS, by the way, with respect to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And that's a 960 millibar wrapped up low that it's showing. I'm going to pull up I'm going to pull up a sounding here, and I know we're going to come back and we're going to look at Dorian on the track up, but just above the surface, you've got 50 knot winds plus all the way up.
Right.
This is a pretty intense feature. Now, yesterday it was making snow in Labrador, and there it is. So there's the first snow. The first snows. The snow lovers are seeing this, and they're jumping up and down. I guarantee it. Okay.
White Dorian.
Right. So now let's go back. Let's roll it back here, and take a look at what we might expect with regards to Dorian going forward. So I think it's pretty much consensus when you look at all the models, and certainly from what's going on currently and what the structure of the upper air. Dorian's not going very far at all in the next 24 hours. And another 24 hours of hurricane force winds for the Bahamas. But later tomorrow, maybe at this time tomorrow night, we're going to start to see it start inching northwestward. And it gets very close on the GFS. That heavy rain band. Maybe instead, Joe, let me bring up the wind. That might be a better one to use. We'll use the 10-meter wind here, so we can at least see the core. So the purple is anything purple is, or inside the darkest colors, that's all 50 knots or higher. So the gales are where you start with the
red. Red or?
No, probably the yellow would be.
Okay.
These are sustained winds now, not gusts.
Yeah.
So you do have gales here developing during the night, later tonight and during tomorrow, probably confined to the immediate coast, but they do rake all the way up to Jacksonville and beyond. But the core always stays offshore. It gets very close at one point here Tuesday night, probably just east of Cape Canaveral, and then it makes the turn. And now you can see how the GFS really brings it almost on shore, probably near Jacksonville, North Carolina, or Morehead City.
The Outer Banks.
Or just goes over or just west of the Outer Banks. And then for us, we get fringe gales touching the coastline on New Jersey and Long Island on Friday. And they get into some pretty strong winds, fairly strong winds in southeastern New England, Cape Cod, Nantucket, and the islands there. And then on to Nova Scotia, where you get a battering here. I mean, those are 65 knot winds in the white area that's just offshore. So it does look like a clobbering. This whole thing has just got me, it's sort of jaw-dropping watching it. Just marveled.
Classic textbook. Well, it's marvelous, but I'm thankful also. I'm sure a lot of our viewers are, except a few of you I know who would have wanted it to come right along the immediate coast, even up here into New York and New Jersey and Long Island. But thankfully, that is not going to happen. But it is going to get a little bit on the breezy side when we get to Friday, as that whole thing passes on by.
Now I'm going to bring up the wide satellite view because there are a few other things going on. And think back, folks, for my regulars who were here a couple of weeks ago, and the general consensus in the conversation among the tropical storm lovers was that the season was dead. And we needed to have patience. And suddenly, when you look at this satellite, everything seems to be turning. You have Dorian, which stands out. I'll bring up a close-up of the one in the Gulf of Mexico, because the Hurricane Center actually, in their latest outlook, they give solid chances to all of these other systems to possibly develop. You actually have a surface low with the system that's to the east-northeast of Dorian. And then look in the lower right. I'm sure I got this framed up right so you can see it. But there definitely is a circulation already there with the system that's southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. It's just a bit on the broad side. But if they start to see convection forming near a center here, you may see this being upgraded to a tropical depression very soon. And then, Joe, there's another big wave right behind it. You can see that big white blob that's coming off the African coast. So we're in a busy period here, and it looks like the Cabo Verde season is going to be a lot more active than what we were giving it credit for a couple of weeks ago.
Right. Well, I mean, that El Nino, as weak as it was, is all but dead now. So, I don't really see very much on the satellite pictures of late of any dust from the Sahara.
No, there was a plume that came off early last week, north of 20 degrees north, and it got almost immediately dispersed. And yeah, there doesn't seem to be any Saharan dust around. So I guess the whatever monsoonal rains in Africa, when they move up north of the equator and push northward to get these waves to move along,
Right.
I guess the air is saturated enough now and far enough north saturated that the dust is no longer an issue. And that dust was a gift from Mr. and Mrs. A little Vaughn Meter.
A little Vaughn Meter for those
Very
who read
little.
The first Family album from 50 plus years ago now.
Yes.
My goodness.
So here's the look in the Gulf of Mexico. Just give the chance for the loop to load a bit so the pictures move faster. And you definitely been seeing an increase in convection. I could almost see maybe a little bit of turning there, somewhere right there in the central Gulf, east of Brownsville, far enough offshore, south of Houston, east of Brownsville, maybe a little bit of turning there. We'll see what the Hurricane Center says about this. Their new outlook's going to be out in about 20 minutes. And if we're still on, we will take a look at that.
Did you see, by the way, the National Weather Service office in Birmingham, Alabama, that answered the president within 20 minutes of a tweet that he had sent out?
What was the tweet?
He had spoken about how devastating the hurricane was and how it was based upon the very latest information that it was going to heavily impact Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and Alabama. and as soon as he said that and put that out, apparently there was a mass panic
in Alabama,
in Alabama, and that pushed the National Weather Service forecast office in Birmingham within 20 minutes after he put out that tweet to say Alabama is not in this.
It's right out.
It's
to
out.
Quote,
Forget about it.
To quote Monty Python, it's right out.
There's no need, or it's like that in Animal House where you see the guy in the street. Everybody stay calm. There's no problem.
Right. There's no problem here. All right. U.S. loop, and then we'll pull up WPC because we had some action here today.
Oh,
I even have a radar, so let me bring that up. There we go. So we'll bring the radar up
but
here.
you know what? Even though we were only under a marginal risk for severe weather, if you had gone to the Severe Storms Forecast Center and clicked on the marginal area, they still had us within a the entire tri-state area within a 2% chance of a tornado.
And it happened,
And
so
it
they
happened.
got it.
You didn't need to get up to slight chance. Marginal was enough.
Pretty solid lines of storms here that developed, and I guess there's enough tropical air around. I really didn't, you spend in situations like this, you spend so much time, you're looking at the hurricane and everything that goes with it, and your local weather just kind of gets lost a little bit.
Right.
But we certainly did have some strong cells. We've got some flash flooding over parts of central New Jersey. You can see there's strong downpours in southeastern New England, just west of Boston and west of Providence and southeastern Connecticut, and also some strong cells around the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. So very definitely active here. And we may have a repeat performance of this to a certain extent on Wednesday because we do have another front coming. I just want to widen out.
And that front on Wednesday is going to play a major role in helping to keep Dorian's the lion's share of Dorian's effects out of the immediate tri-state area, save, of course, for the rip currents and rough seas and undertow that will occur thanks to the storm acting like a gigantic egg beater.
Right, and on the edge of the radar range here down in Florida, on the wide view, you can see the spiral bands there show up pretty well. And as far as Dorian is concerned with respect to rainfall, since it's moving up the coast, we should take a look at what WPC is doing with these rainfall amounts, because initially, with the slow movement, even though the western edge of the heavy rain may not get all the way west into Florida, and also maybe not that far inland into South and North Carolina, there will be a strip of 10-inch plus rains riding right along the immediate coast from say West Palm Beach, going all the way up to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And if you follow the track of this, if you envision the track, once we get east of North Carolina, the low is going to probably be on the southern end of this rain shield. So we're kind of on the edge of this.
Right.
And some of that's also because of rain for whatever we get with showers and storms on Wednesday.
Right.
So the blue is up to an inch and a half. So, I'm thinking, Joe, that for us, it's we get it either glances us or maybe we get a bit more. But this is not a setup for something to shoot straight up the East Coast.
No, thankfully not. And it also kind of reminds me, a lot of people have been talking about the similarities to Matthew. This also brings up a similarity in a way to a storm way back when, 35 years ago, and that was Hurricane Diana. And I remember Diana because I was on a cruise going to Bermuda.
Wow.
And meanwhile, this storm was passing right along the southeast and the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and thankfully it kind of veered away from the New York metropolitan area, but kind of churned up the water on the passenger cruise ship that my wife and I were on celebrating our honeymoon way back when.
Never fun to be. I don't even want to be out there when the water's calm. I can't imagine when it's like.
Well, it's so much of a difference between the cruise lines now. 35 years ago, rough seas, even with the stabilizers they had back then, they could still toss those big ships around. But now we're talking about passenger cruise ships on the order of about 100 to 150,000 tons, much, much bigger. I mean, they're literally like hotels now.
I know, but I'm not doing it.
Well,
I'm not doing it.
It's still fun.
I know, but I'm not doing it.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say thanks to Kathleen Trudy for hitting Super Chat tonight. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I hope you're still on, and thank you very much for doing that. I'm just checking to see when Dorian passes, is there any chance that the storm hugs the coast all the way up through the Northeast? Ask Abedin Durakovic.
I think the front that, as Joe mentioned, may touch off a couple of thunderstorms here late on Wednesday will be far enough to our east and south, and the storm will attempt to come in our direction, but that front is going to kind of force it and keep it at bay a few hundred miles to our south and east. So I don't think that's the only way that storm could not or could come our way is if for some crazy reason that Wednesday cold front suddenly decides to stall just to our west.
And it doesn't appear that it's going to do that.
No.
It just moves along and sort of dissipates a bit, and then you wait for the energy to swing around. One upside, I thought, was that after Dorian goes by, we should have a really nice weekend here.
Yes.
Coming up. Reasonable temperatures, very low humidity, should be bone dry humidity, making it down into the mid-Atlantic states for sure, I think. Yeah, just a couple of nice days with
Lovely.
cool temperatures behind it. Scour out and clean up the air.
Lovely.
Lose their tropical structure characteristics. Things sort of stretch out. Different environment in the Northeast. Correct, Philip. The wind field expands. So you have a larger area of gales, but your strongest winds are lower. Mm-hmm. And they tend to be also spread out rather than concentrated near the center. And also the rain shield changes. If you looked at the maps before, it looks a lot more like a winter storm when it gets up this way than it does
Right.
an actual tropical storm. And sometimes those can be a lot worse, depending on what the track is. But thankfully, this is, for our area at least, that we cover, eastern PA to southern New England, it goes south and east, but then again it heads up toward Nova Scotia and comes in, lock, stock, and barrel there, and it's already done that a few runs in a row. So I'm gaining some confidence that will be the case.
And it looks like they may very well lose power in a lot of parts of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And if they do, I hope that we in our neck of the woods, the northeastern United States, will be able to come to their rescue as they did with the last couple of winters. I lost power, was it this past winter or the winter before? I think it was the winter before. I was out of power for like several days, and the people who reconnected me were from Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. So they helped us, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same if indeed the worst comes to pass for the Maritime provinces this weekend.
The chairman, Scott Briller, hit Super Chat tonight. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciated. That's a stogie for me and a couple of cups of tea for you.
Yes.
Okay?
Thank you.
I'll buy you a couple of cups of tea out of that. Dave Giannotti, so you can address this. He asks, well, now that I lost his question, hang on. It's not you, Dave. It's me. I clicked a button, but he was asking. All right, my memory is working right now. So while it's still working, he was asking why a storm like this, as fierce as it is, and yet at the same and producing winds in excess of 180 miles an hour, can't move.
Well, there's no steering current. We were talking about this last week.
What causes the slow movement of a storm this size with such strong winds?
It's that call, if you will, that calm zone between the ridge and the trough off to the west, where there's really absolutely no upper level wind movement. So this thing is just gliding right into a zone where there is no particular steering current to move it in any significant direction. And eventually, or ultimately, over the next 24 hours, the upper level winds will be able to pick it up a little bit and push it on that north-northwest to eventually north and northeast trajectory. But right now, it's in a zone where there's hardly any wind movement at all, and that's why it's just sitting there and just battering the Great Bahama Islands over and over and over again. It's just crazy.
Jason Nappy, who is down in Lafayette, Louisiana, at what's your television station again? I worked in southeast Louisiana many years ago. I don't remember the call letters of the stations down there, Jason, so put it in the chat so we can give you a free, shameless self-promotion. But Jason worked with me for a short time at PIX as a producer. So he's on the air now in Lafayette, Louisiana, and as soon as he got there, he got baptized by fire because they had Hurricane Barry. But as far as Nova Scotia goes, Jason, it does look as if the storm's in line to head up there. The way the track is, and given what the upper air is with that deep upper low in southeastern Canada that's basically just going to rotate up and around it. I didn't even look at the European today. You did. But right. Did it take it? The European took it just south of Nova Scotia toward Newfoundland, whereas the GFS takes it over Nova Scotia and northward. So there are some model differences here between the GFS and the European in the longer term with regards to Nova Scotia. So I certainly wouldn't put it in the inevitable category. But the probability certainly is high that something's going to happen out of this.
Yeah, I'm sure
for that area.
I'm sure the folks at the Environment Canada office in Halifax, which I visited back in, my goodness, it's over 20 years now, 1999, August of '99. I'm sure that they're going to be working hand in hand with the National Hurricane Center in terms of producing or providing updates for Nova Scotia as Dorian approaches their zone later on this week.
So Anthony Orr, one of our two resident statisticians, also the chairman being the other, says while Hurricane Dorian center is most likely to stay off the east coast of Florida, Hurricane Matthew produced very significant surge in Jacksonville, which we spoke about earlier on. Do you expect the same from Dorian? It sets up the same way, right. And you've got the moon phases working here as well. We're just coming off the new moon. Levi Cowan talked about this yesterday. The only thing is, I would just put this on the table. No two storms are identical. So sometimes it has happened where you look at two storms and they kind of look the same, and you expect a similar outcome, and it doesn't quite work out that way. But I would. Given the parameters that we have here, it would seem that Dorian will cause a significant amount of tidal flooding along the Florida coastline. In fact, we could probably bring up the storm surge map. Johnny Quest, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Johnny's one of our regulars. So let me bring up, we'll go to the Hurricane Center, see if I can find the storm surge. The interaction, the storm surge inundation tool, which for those of you, it's on. Go to nhc.noaa.gov, and it's one of the graphics that they have where you can zero in on your particular area to look at predicted storm surges. And I'm just gonna, I'll get real tight on a few spots.
And of course, this will cause significant beach erosion as well.
Right. This is a little early in the game anyway, because of where the storm is.
Right.
But we are seeing, and I'll put the graphic up for everybody to see.
You know what our dear friend Mr. Devoskin defined beach erosion as, right?
Go ahead. What
Norm
was the king of corny jokes.
King of corny jokes and puns too. Beach erosion. The definition: the great terrain robbery. Yes.
Well, that's our Norm. We love him dearly.
Yes.
So back to the storm surge tool. I think the yellow. I got to find the legend. Why they have to make these things difficult? I believe the yellow is, I want to say 3 to 5. Well, you know what? Before I even opened my mouth, there we go. So the yellow is 3 feet above ground. The blue is 1 foot above ground. So if you get the darker yellow, the brownish one, that's 6 feet above, and the red is 9 feet above. And again, this is for the upcoming tide, so I wouldn't expect to see very much in these upcoming tides, and yet you are seeing some tidal flooding here going up the Florida coast. I don't know if you're familiar, folks might be familiar with Cape Romaine Harbor. I don't know where exactly that is. I'll just get a little. I'll tell you where it is. It's all the way up in South Carolina.
It's all the way up in North Carolina, Joe.
Okay, wrong place. Sorry about that. But you get the idea, folks. Okay, here's the Palm Coast. And you're seeing 3 feet here, greater than 3 feet, showing up along the Palm Coast in Florida. And again, it's very early. I would think that you're probably
Wait a minute. The Palm Coast is the blue. That's 1 feet.
Right.
And further back to the west is yellow.
Because you got all these back bays and all the water just kind of floods in.
Right.
Some of the water gets to escape out. A lot of it gets trapped going, as you go inland.
Right.
So it becomes a particular problem. And it was a big problem up when you get up closer to Jacksonville, because you've got, the water just came pouring in and caused record flooding there in Matthew. So I would not expect to see much. The numbers really go up until maybe you start getting into Wednesday, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. That time frame would probably be one where you're going to see more tidal flooding around. Let me go back to the chat board, see if we got any more questions here or comments. Hang on. Yes, Jason, you're out in the Gulf, so you got to deal with a whole different animal over there when it comes to those storms that are coming up from the south. And going back to, I believe it was Dave's question with regards to the movement. Some Category 5 history going back to Category 5s. When you look at Camille was moving at almost 20 miles an hour when it made landfall.
Right.
And so was Michael, very close to it, if I remember correctly. And
you
that
factor in that forward speed with the actual strength of the hurricane.
And also, the circulation coming over land is going to have an impact on the pressure to at least cause the strengthening to level off and possibly even to weaken a bit before making landfall. But if it's moving fast enough, it makes up for it. It doesn't have time to weaken yet.
Right.
It takes
Wilma was another example down in Florida.
Right. So when they're moving quickly, it's actually more dangerous from the standpoint of tropical storms and hurricanes. When they move quickly. And in our instance, this time around being stationary, it actually has helped out by causing it to lose some strength, but still it's a formidable Category 4 hurricane.
And that's probably also why the great hurricane of 1938, the so-called Long Island Express, which actually created Shinnecock Inlet. I mean, that thing was rolling along at about 30 or 40 miles an hour.
Oh, it recarved a lot of inlets there.
Right. And, again, the forward speed can be everything in the world when you're dealing with a major storm, a major hurricane, and that forward speed helps. It doesn't really give a chance for the system to die off or diminish.
Right. All right, so you think we've covered it enough?
I think so. What else have we not covered here?
All right, so... All right, so we'll leave it at that. Tomorrow morning, weather in 5. We'll probably have it up there, hopefully before 9 a.m., depending on how late I sleep. But I'm usually up early enough. So hopefully I'll have it up there before 8 a.m. Website posts are up. App is updated, so you can get all information on there. And we'll be back tomorrow night with our regular YouTube live stream, probably at about 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Patreon members, you get your Weather in 10. You'll get that tomorrow afternoon in between Weather in 5 and the big live stream. You get your members only Weather in 10.
And let me, based in part upon Saturday afternoon when I entered the chat, the YouTube chat.
Yes, you did.
On my daughter's YouTube site, and you said you ought to get your own.
And you did.
And we
so
do.
So hang on. Everybody in the chat board, hold on 1 second. So I'm going to put the link up to Joe Rayo's YouTube channel, which is
Joe Rayo Weather.
Joe Rayo Weather. And there he is. You've got 3 subscribers already, Joe. And now you've got 4 because I subscribe. So everybody, because we're going to get Joe savvy so that he could start doing his own live streams on a regular basis, so that we can do them together and we can do them separately.
You can Skype them.
So
and,
exactly.
So that'd be good.
Skype and put them on the internet.
All are welcome.
Yes.
And if you go on my site, you'll be able to see. I'm going to put some of my past, what we call in the business, your reel, your past stuff that you put on the air. And the one thing that's up there now, especially since 9/11 is coming our way next week, as we mark, I can't believe, what is it now, 18 years?
Yeah.
18 years. Anyway, on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, at my former news gathering service where I used to be employed, I did a special, which actually garnered me an Emmy nomination about a hurricane that was heading for the New York area and was actually pushed out of our. It actually looked like it would be great because it was going to bring in lovely weather, beautiful weather for September 11, which it did. But it also pushed this Category 3 Hurricane Aaron, and that name popped up last week.
Yes, it did.
They cycle in 6-year intervals.
And if they don't retire them, and then they come back.
Exactly. So if you want to take a look at that and get a handle on that, and as well, if you want to become a subscriber, we will eventually build up and work our way toward. And we're not going to be rivals, are we? We're not.
Oh, no. We're certainly not rivals.
No.
We could never be rivals.
No.
We could be difficult, but we could never be. Reaver 501 says his mother calls you the silver fox of weather.
Oh, thank you.
And
Which actually it's a nice compliment, but in the broadcasting industry, silver foxes don't usually get selected to be on the air. But hopefully. Hopefully that will not work against me in the weeks and months to come.
And David Schwartz says you're up to 7 subscribers now.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm just going to refresh. Let's see what the count is. Oh my God, 28.
28.
Oh,
thank you.
Going up.
Thank you.
Watch that piece, by the way, on his YouTube channel. It's excellent. It's an excellent piece about what happened on that particular day with respect to Hurricane Aaron and how that could have changed everything.
There's a scene at the end where my cameraman, Mark Blumenthal, who's a great guy, and I think he's out of the business now, and he won several Emmys. We went down to a place in Brooklyn so that he said, we need something iconic. And he put the Verrazano Bridge behind me for my final stand-up shot. Joe, he made me do that stand-up. I swear to you, I'm not exaggerating, 51 times.
Wow.
Until we finally got, as he said, the right look. So I'm very proud of that. It got me a nomination. It didn't get me a statue, but I'm still very, very proud of that. And I hope all of you get a chance to look at it now, too.
All right, take a look at it, folks. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for being here tonight. Good night, everybody.
Good night.